I thank the President for recognizing me. I know we're talking, among other things, this week about the agriculture bill, and I am supportive of moving forward with that bill. Like so many other things in our economy, the more certainty we can create for farming families, for agribusinesses, the more likely they are to make decisions now and to make decisions that create good results. The more things you know in advance, normally in decision making, the more things there are to know. You know, there's plenty to know, there's plenty that you don't know in agriculture. My mom and dad were dairy farmers, and there's lots that can go wrong on the farm, and you don't know how many things there might be, weather and lots of other things that you can't count on. It'd be nice to have a farm bill that you could count on, and I know that the bill we pass here will only be half of the work of getting that bill passed, but we need to do that, and we need to get our economy going again. You know, like so many others, I disagree with the President's sense that the private sector is fine, because the private sector is not fine and the economy is not fine. It's not private sector job creation, as I've said on this floor many times in the last 2 years, should be the #1 priority domestically of the government today. What can we do to create more private sector jobs? 2 years ago, the administration, the White House, kicked off the recovery summer. They said that the success of the $831 billion stimulus plan had done its job. Secretary Geithner penned an op-ed in the New York Times that said, "Welcome to the recovery." But today we still see unemployment higher than it should be, the unemployment rate 8.2%. If we were looking at the same workforce that we had 30 years ago, and we know that the population's gotten bigger, so logically the workforce got bigger too. If we were looking at a workforce that was reflective of the workforce in January of 2009, unemployment would be 11.1% today. It's 8.2% because we're considering a workforce that is smaller, the people that are actively out there considering themselves either in the workforce or wanting to be in the workforce, lower than any time in the last 30 years. Certainly, the recovery summer didn't work. The rhetoric was high, but the economy didn't grow as we would have hoped it would. The creation of jobs didn't occur. GDP, the gross domestic product, grew at 1.7% in 2011, and still below 2%, 1.9% in 2012. Only 77,000 jobs were created in April, and only 69,000 jobs were created in May. Madam President, we're just not doing the job here. The stimulus didn't work, and part of the stimulus was to try to help states offset the shortages they had. But to some extent, all that did was postpone for another year or maybe even 2 years, states having to make decisions that only states should make. You know, the federal government has enough things to run without trying to run everything. The federal government shouldn't be responsible for the things that states are responsible for, and we should do the things we do at the federal level the best they can possibly be done, starting with defending the country. You know, we're looking at some reduction in defense spending that, if it happens, will not only negatively impact our ability to defend the country, but if we don't do those reductions exactly right, it will also have real impact on the economy. The stimulus didn't create the jobs. The labor force participation rates at a 30-year low. Middle-class incomes have dropped $4,350 in the last 3 years. The private sector is not doing well, nor is the economy doing well. The number of long-term unemployed has doubled to 4 to 5.5 million since the president took office. Housing prices continue to decline. Many of the economic forecasters, including the Congressional Budget Office, project that economic growth downgrades and skepticism toward the recovery will continue. The Congressional Budget Office recently released a dismal long-term budget outlook showing that the country's federal debt per person is on the track to triple in a generation. Now, that track has to stop. We can make the decision, do we want to be Europe? Do we want to be Greece? Do we want to be Italy? Do we want to be Ireland or Portugal or Spain? And all you have to do is pick up a paper any day of the week now to know that surely that's not who we want to be. Or do we want to get our government right-sized for our economy? Do we want to get back to where we don't let our economy be overwhelmed by the government? You know, what's happened in so many of the countries I just mentioned and others in Europe is that they've let the government get bigger than the economy can support. CBO talked about what would happen if we don't take this action between now and early next year, if we let taxes go back up, if we let defense spending go in the direction that it appears to be heading. What happens then? Even President Clinton and former domestic advisor and Secretary of the Treasury Summers said we need to continue current tax policies for some time in the future. I remember in the end of 2010, the president said, now's not the time to discourage jobs. Well, exactly when would be the time to discourage jobs? The job of the federal government domestically should be to figure out what we can do to encourage jobs, because the federal government, with only the rarest of rare occasions, the federal government, with few exceptions, doesn't create jobs. The federal government, however, has a lot to say about the environment where people make that decision as to whether they're going to create a job or not, with constant discussion of energy policies that don't make sense and too much regulation and raising taxes and healthcare costs that are unknown for every job you add. People just don't add those jobs. So whether it's the agriculture economy, which again, I'll say, even though the unemployment there is twice as high as government sector unemployment, the ag economy, it's almost twice as high as the 4.2% of government sector unemployment. It's still a bright spot in the current economy, but that economy will be better if we give people more of a chance to plan. The recovery summer didn't work. We'll soon know what the court has to say about the Affordable Health Care Act, but I will tell you that you only have to talk to a few job creators and not for very long to know that the Affordable Health Care Act is standing in the way of job creation, just as our regulations. The EPA keeps regulating. The shortest path to more American jobs would be more American energy. And we have energy and resources in greater abundance than we believed we had just a few years ago. Oil shale, gas shale. We should produce more of our own energy that would allow us to make things again. And what we can't produce, if we can buy it from our closest neighbors and our dependable friends, we should do that. There's nothing wrong with buying things from people who don't like you, but it's crazy to have to buy things from people who don't like you, particularly if you can buy things from people who like you. We send $1 to our neighbors in Canada, they send almost $1 back every single time. The likelihood that Canadians will decide that they don't want to sell us oil or gas is virtually zero. We can't say that about every country that we have gotten too dependent on in recent years. So let's do the right things, Madam President. Let's have a true path to recovery. Let's have good energy policy. Let's have good tax policy. Let's have good regulatory policy. And let's see if we can't get the private sector the kind of priority in job creation it needs to be. And of course, that includes one of the brightest lights in the private sector, which is farming families and the ag economy and our ability to compete in a world because of the great job we do in agriculture. And I would yield back.